Hello and welcome to Weavy's The Future of Work. I'm Lydia Nickel, CMO of Weavy, and I'm joined today by Melanie Vargas, founder and CEO of Radical Ignition, which is an executive coaching, leadership training, and HR consultancy. So thank you so much for joining me today, Melanie.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So just to get us started, if you could take a minute or two and just describe what it is that Radical Ignition is and what your area of expertise is.
Yes. So for the last 25 years or so, I've worked in HR and organizational development. I spent the last half of my career working inside organizations and the last 15 years consulting. And in my consulting career, I had the great privilege of working across hundreds of mostly technology companies. I had an opportunity to walk through lots of exciting liquidity events and acquisitions during that period of time. And then in late 2019, I decided to launch Radical Ignition. And so I've been working this last year, launched really in the middle of the pandemic. I was up and fully launched. And that was, so I can now say I've launched a business in the middle of a global pandemic. So that's been a lot of fun.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. And, of course, going along with the theme of future of work, I'm sure as someone who is a leadership coach and, HR specialist, you have seen a lot of shifts in the industry that you're in this year. And I'm guessing certainly with the companies that you consult with. So I'm just curious to hear about your perspective about what that shift looks like for recruiting for, perhaps more distributed teams or fully remote roles. I'm wondering about your perspective, if there is a different set of skills that you're looking for, or personalities. How are you now approaching that in these changing times?
Yeah, I think it's the most important time for organizations and leaders and teams to really be focusing and drilling it down on competencies. So to really focus on your recruiting process and training your leaders to really drill down on your recruiting process. So looking at how are we really asking the right questions? So when you think about behavioral interviewing and looking at those competencies and really even the values of the organization, we're looking for things now with our remote workers. For example, we would be looking for more adaptable employees. We're looking for more resourceful employees. We're looking for more resilient employees. And maybe when our employees were on site working in our offices, we didn't need our employees to be quite that resourceful because we were working alongside with them now. So now we've got to really dig in and make sure that we're asking the right questions. So it's even more important to have the right recruiting process.
Yeah, great. And then, so just piggybacking on that theme, but how has your role changed as a consultant for these growing organizations and, them having to pivot and how you are able to service them in their new needs?
Yeah, I would say we're using technology more than we ever have. I work a lot with early stage companies. My career has been mostly working with very entrepreneurial organizations, and even my really scrappy early stage organizations are relying on technology platforms more than they ever have before. And we have to really use those technology platforms more than we ever have to help us look for talent and using assessment tools and things like that to help us find candidates.
Right, because you're not having those, in-person one-to-one interactions where you can maybe rely a little bit more on gut instinct or,
Right.
these kinds of things. Yeah, interesting. So just kind of going off of that, what role do you think, tools and technology are playing in the success of organizations now? So how, I understand that recruiting and HR and leadership are really now relying more heavily on the tools that they're using. But how important is it for leaders to also really make sure that they're equipping their teams with the right tools? Do you see kind of more of that happening as well in the ways that you're coaching your leaders?
Yeah, I think technology is, it's probably more important than ever. in making sure that we're equipping leaders with the right tools to be successful. Um, you know, I think, if I think about how that is shifted over the last year, I've done some work with non-tech companies, and I'm even seeing those organizations relying on technology more than they ever have before. So we're going to have to really shift in those areas more than we ever have, and teach people how to work with technology more than they ever have. I mean, if you think about Zoom, non-tech companies really didn't use platforms like Zoom before, and they're having to learn and shift and pivot in their businesses more than they ever have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, understood. And then, so what, going off that, maybe more so than just equipping leaders and leaders equipping their employees with the right tools, but what do you think are important elements of leadership for our current working climate? Like, how can managers really facilitate, cultures of collaboration, but also autonomy at the same time? These are the new challenges that I think a lot of organizations are being faced with remote work or distributed teams.
Yeah, so there's a lot of challenges with remote teams. So when you look at managing remote workers, we've got, our workers are at an all-time low in terms of engagement. We've got, distracted workers. So our leaders need to be, our leaders need to be really dialed in. Our leaders need to be trained, and our leaders need to be more sort of dialed into what's happening with their people. And I think there's lots of tools to help them learn how to do that. So I think organizations need to equip their tools with, not just with people like me, but with lots of other types of tools and resources to help them not only manage and lead their people, but also provide that kind of, you mentioned the collaboration, but collaboration platforms to, there's things like Slack and different types of tools to really allow them to be able to communicate and collaborate with their teams.
Mm. So it's also, I guess you would say, more important than ever also for, leaders themselves to get the right resources and support to make sure that they are, actually leading their teams in the right way as they're navigating this new normal as well.
You've got employees that are struggling and with their own levels of stress and ambiguity and change. And then you've got the leaders themselves that are struggling with ambiguity and change. So, we're all sort of dealing with all this uncertainty in the future. And, we're trying to navigate it together. And so whatever resources organizations can provide to help, their employees navigate through this period of time, it's gonna help them survive a little bit better.
Yeah, understandable. And then I guess just from kind of your leadership coaching mindset, but how can leaders really achieve that kind of coveted balance between holding teams accountable and making sure that, there is kind of transparency with an organization, but not treading so far that they go into like micromanagement and, how can leaders that are working with distributed teams or remote employees do more to ensure that they know what's going on with their workers?
I mean, I think it starts with really good communication. There's organizational communication, and then there's how am I communicating with my teams and my people. And so you're right. It's a fine balance between dialing in, but not dialing in too much, because we don't want to be micromanaging. But it's not the same when you're managing people remotely. So I think when we're managing this diverse population of people all across, in some cases, a global workforce where people are all over the place, it's almost hard to micromanage. So we're almost not dialed in enough. We went from being too dialed in to now not being dialed in enough. But there is a fine line to making sure that we're paying attention. So it's the time to really be checking in with people, having one-on-one meetings, balancing and not having too many team meetings, but just the right amount of collaboration and team meetings. So, I think it's, again, the right approach of communication for each group.
Sure, that makes sense. And then so now kind of talking about, we talked about technology and how important that is, now more than ever, and it will be continuing that way into the future. But as someone who, works very closely with people and really, empowering organizations through their people that they recruit, where do you see kind of the balance of, you know maybe the school of thought of that, like teams are only as good as the tools that they have, or teams only as good as their leaders, or is there kind of another way to think about internal organization and how we can build up and support leaders and workers?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I see it a little bit differently. I think, the tools actually enhance your leadership and your capability within the organization. Um, so, how can you build leadership capability within your teams and your organization? Um, so, what platforms or what technology can you put in your organization that's going to actually make you better? I see it the same way with technology that makes me a better consultant.
Mhm.
It's a value add to what you're providing your employees and providing your leadership teams. It's going to make you a better organization. It's going to make your teams more productive to have those tools within your organization.
Mhm. That's great. So just one final question here. This is the Weavy Future of Work interview series. So, any thoughts on what the future of work looks like, and what that can mean for us, whether that's from the perspective of you and your business, or how you are coaching other organizations.
Yeah, so I have seen, obviously we're more remote than we've ever been, and my prediction is that this will continue into the future. We've seen even compensation strategies starting to for our in our HR world, we're seeing compensation strategies really starting to shift. So we're for those of us that are kind of living and breathing in the compensation world, we're seeing that you can live in California and then up and decide to move and live in Idaho or some small town and keep your same salary. So we're not seeing a lot of organizations changing
Mhm.
salaries based on where you live. In the old days you would get a decrease if you moved to a market that had a lower compensation rate, and now a lot of organizations, especially tech companies, are seeing that that doesn't make sense because we've got this virtual world that we're living in, and we need to be adaptable to engaging and retaining our employees regardless of where they live. So I think my prediction is that that will continue to evolve, and that we will continue to have this virtual world and provide that regardless of when people come back and work some in the office. That we will always have a more generally more virtual work world.
Yeah, sure. And actually, just a quick follow-up question then. It's an interesting point that you make about compensation schemes. So I think also, that brings up an interesting point about perks of, a lot of you say you work with early stage companies and entrepreneurial businesses who maybe have this kind of startup mentality where there's a lot of fun perks with working in the office. How does that change now? How are you really attracting top talent when you don't have those same kind of cool perks anymore with having a trendy office?
Yeah, perks are evolving. So we have to get really creative with some of those old office perks that now perks come in the form of Uber vouchers.
Mhm.
Even, some of our old, office perks, team building events and things like that have evolved to, games that team games, online games and things like that we play. So definitely, there's no longer like free chips in the kitchen and free drinks, soft drinks in the kitchen. So as organizations, we're having to evolve to kind of virtual and even technology. We're relying on technology to provide those perks. They're gift cards, like digital gift cards.
Mhm.
Everything's a digital environment now. So again, we're relying on technology to service those needs as well.
Interesting. Well, it'll certainly, we've had a lot of change in the last year. It'll certainly be interesting as we see more and more, large organizations, announce that, they're doing away with the, traditional 9 to 5 and, moving to permanent, remote work options. So I think we're still in store for a lot of changes here as we're all navigating this new normal.
Agreed.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Melanie, for joining me today. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Lydia. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you. Bye bye.